Today we're going to be continuing our tier list series. We're on to the Nilfgaard Golds. I'll briefly go over the tiers again. We have Excellent, so these are cards that are played fairly often, and you see them in decks, or they define a deck that's pretty competitive. You have Good cards, these are played. You see these pretty often, maybe they're not like this most impactful thing in the deck, but you do see them, they're pretty good. Okay cards are cards that are playable, but they're usually not your optimal choice, so often these will be cards that you can choose as an option, like maybe it's a meta choice. Sometimes you pick these over the other cards, or like they're consideration that usually don't get picked, but they're pretty close. We have niche cards. These are rarely seen to have their moments, or this is like a card that defines a deck, but the deck's not very good. So like Mill, for example, is not a good deck, but if their card defines Mill, maybe it goes in here. Then we have Weak. Weak cards are not played hardly ever, but they could be with a buff. So these are cards that would probably be playable with one buff or something like that. So they're not great at the moment, but they have the potential to improve. We have bad cards. These cards are terrible, and you don't want to play them until they get buffed, at least probably more than once, honestly. But these cards are really terrible. And then we have meme cards, which are just unplayable. Stuff in here has like a design issue with it, where it cannot be made viable, really, or it has like it's just never gonna work out. Anyway, so into the actual cards here. We'll go back and forth between the library again because I found that was pretty effective last time. We'll do Abduction here, the first card alphabetically. So Abduction here, Tactic, 9 provisions. It plays a unit that wasn't in the opponent's starting deck from their deck with 10 or less provisions, and it boosts it by 1 for each provision below the limit. So there's 2 ways you can do this. Usually you have to put the card into the opponent's deck unless they're playing like Temple of Melidly or something. So usually you have to put effort into giving the opponent a card. That's very easy with a couple cards, though. The most common one is you play Sandor and put a drone into their deck. It's 0 provisions. When you play the drone, it gets plus 10 in addition to whatever the drone's actual power is. The other way is you play Henry and you give them cards, and like you pick like Vilgefortz or something else that's like a good expensive card, and you just play it out of your deck with this. So there's a bunch of options there. You can always play like a one of Toxicologist too. So there's a bunch of options for Abduction. It does have good value, and it's got some flexibility depending on what you make with it. I'm going to put Abduction in okay. It's not bad. Like you do see Abduction sometimes, but usually you pick other tactics in the slot instead, or you play a different card here at 9 provisions and save your tactics for your cheap cards, and that's usually what you see. But it's not bad. You can definitely play Abduction. It's got some uses. It's good in certain decks like Clog, if you're putting things into the opponent's deck, but usually the problem with that is then you're taking a card out of their deck, so you don't want to play Undedicated Clog because you give them a card, you take it out. It's best with something like Henry, but it is all right. It's not. It's pretty good most of the time, but usually you don't like. Yeah, it's just pretty okay. I wouldn't say it's a good card you see often, but it's all right. It's an option. Next up, we have Admiral Rompally. So Admiral Rompally here has Zeal Order, 4 for 13 provisions, very expensive. Lock, you choose 3 units. The first one's locked, the second one is poison, and the third one is spying. You have to pick 3 different units. You can't lock poison and spying the same unit. You also can't lock one, then poison another, and spying the first one again. At the end of your turn, you boost self by the highest amount of statuses on an enemy unit. So ideally what you do here is you put like a bunch of statuses on something. So for example, say they have a token that already has Doomed. You give it like Bleeding, and then he puts the spying on it. This guy gets 3 points a turn. That's pretty good. Putting out Lock, Poison, and Spying. The Spying's the least impactful, but putting out Lock's pretty good. Putting out Poison's quite nice in status decks. He's an aristocrat, so he goes in those status decks. Overall, he's very expensive, but he does do a pretty good job in those decks, so I'm going to put him in good. He's a pretty solid spot in the aristocrat status decks, and those decks are not too bad. Next up, we have Affan, one of the reworked cards. So at some point, 4 with 1 armor for 10 provisions. Once all the leader charges are used up, summon self from deck to an allied row. So kind of like a conditional roach there, but he costs 10. If you control at least 4 units with flanking, play self instead and gain zeal. That is very hard to have. Well, it's not very hard. A lot of times you get locked, but it's kind of hard to have 4 flanking units on the board. His orders boost all allied soldiers with armor by 1. So the order is actually pretty good. It's sort of comparable to the garrison, where it gives all the copies like 1 and 1 armor. It has a pretty decent effect. Like the order is pretty solid. I think the issue with Affan is once you use all your leader charges, you're pretty committed most of the time to like winning in that round, or you're playing a Renfrey deck. And at 4 with 1 armor, 5 damage removes him, and 5 damage removing this order is pretty annoying. So at the moment, I'm going to say Afan's a little weak. He's not bad, though. I think he just needs like to be 9 or 5 power. I think 5 power would be more interesting for him. But I think he's just a little bit weak at the moment, and you don't see him. But I think he has some potential in the future if he ever gets buffed. because his order is actually pretty nice, robusting, or not robusting, like boosting all your soldiers with armor in a soldier deck that could be quite interesting. Next up we have Albric. So we've got Albric here, Human Mage, 4 for 7. A move to the top of your deck, a boost a random allied unit by 2, and boost self by 2. So Albric is the definition of a deck-defining card. If you're playing Hyperthin at the moment, it's probably an Albric deck. And what he does is you just move him back to the top of your deck a whole bunch of times. You can move him with Vikavara Novice, with Couriers, which are why those cards are like playable in those decks. You can move him with Tactical Decision. There's a bunch of different ways you can move him. Blight Makers, for example, and he gets up to pretty good value, like 14, 16 points like that. And the extra nice thing is each time you're triggering him, he's acting as an engine and boosting your board. So when we look at Vikavara Novice, it draws a card and puts it back, or Courier that moves something to the top. They're 4 or 5 point plays, tempo plays. But if you're doing on Albric, he's giving you 2 points on the board, so it becomes 6 and 7 point tempo plays, which is really impactful for Hyperthin because they kind of struggle sometimes with tempo early without dropping the leader, just because you're spending time like setting things up in your deck with him. You could use in non-Albric decks. There's options like Imperial Golem or something, but the actual value for this guy giving you is usually just more impactful, and he's the play you play Hyperthin at the moment. So he is going to go into excellent for being a deck-defining card. Rent-free Hyperthin is the best Hyperthin, and rent-free Hyperthin is actually like a pretty reasonable deck. And he's like the key card in that deck other than rent-free. Next up we have Anna Henrietta. Anna Henrietta is a really interesting card. So she's a 3 for 9 human aristocrat. Ranged, replace your leader ability with a base copy of your opponent's. Now, sometimes your opponent will be playing the same leader as you. This is pretty common if you play Nilfgaard, because Nilfgaard's a very common faction. If you're playing Nilfgaard against Double Cross, well, you can have the ultimate clown fiesta if you're both playing Anna Henrietta and you're both playing Double Cross, and just use like getting more and more Double Crosses. You Double Cross their Anna Henrietta out of their hand, you coup their Anna Henrietta, it just gets incredibly wild and crazy. But most of the time, you're going to play against another faction, for the most part. And most leader abilities are worth around, I would say, like 9 points of value. So she's playing for about that much, but then leaders tend to synergize with decks. Some are better than others. Like, for example, if you copy an enslaved deck, you might not be playing any tactics. That would be quite annoying. But if you play something like guerrilla tactics, you're always getting those 9 points, and the movement could be pretty valuable. So it kind of depends what you're playing against. Usually it's going to be worth about 9 points in a good one. Something like Nature's Gift might be worth like 6. But usually it's going to be around like between 6 and 12 value total. Probably about 9, I would say, is average. The upside here, obviously, is against decks where the leader synergizes super well with you. So maybe like the dwarf one where you can spawn a tempering that's triggering your assimilates. The same thing with any of the tokens like the not Unseen Elder, Woodland Spirit token, if you're playing assimilate, stuff like that. I'm going to say she's alright. You see her reasonable amount, but she's usually not picked over other cards in the decks, but she's certainly an option for things in assimilate, and she's a really fun one you can use. Next up, we have the Arda Feainn. So this is a 11 provision artifact with resilience. Has the order, look at the top 2 cards of your deck and choose one to move to the bottom. So it's cycling through your deck. The downside here is if you see 2 good cards, one is going on the bottom, which could be a problem, but you know that for your tutor cards. Then if the card you saw was an agent, give an enemy spawning. If it's an aristocrat, give an enemy bleeding. The one you chose. So whenever you play an aristocrat, refresh the order. So what this does is it's constantly cycling your cards in your deck to stack the cards you want while putting out statuses. Whenever you play an aristocrat, it refreshes the order, so you can keep doing this. And if you're playing like see an agent and aristocrat, which there are a couple of, you can put out both statuses. And while this is in the deck, when you play a gold aristocrat, it summons itself out of your deck. So it thins itself out of your deck, and it keeps putting out statuses to trigger your statuses in your status of aristocrat deck, and it keeps cycling your deck to find the cards you want. Overall, Arda Feainn is a really good card in status Nilfgaard. That's the only deck you can really play it in, but it is quite good in there for putting out statuses and stuff. I don't think it's quite deck defining because there are alternative thinning options, right? You could play something like Oneiromancy Decree or Blight Makers. Usually you don't. You pretty much always play this instead. But you do see sometimes like Jan Calway in Tactics in Masquerade Ball instead of this. I don't think I'm putting an excellent tier, but it's definitely a very good card. Next up we have an interesting one, which is Ardal. Alright, so we got Ardal. He's 7 for 12. Got the deploy range if neither player has passed and the opponent's hand is not full, so you can't like cheese this out. And they have a non-doomed card, right? You can't like pick a token so it gets banished or something, go up a card. You target the unit with up to 2 power, then draw a card, and goes back to their hand. And the value increases by the number of tactics. So you almost always play this in Enslave 6, in which case you can return up to a 14. So the upside here is you're returning a known card to the opponent's hand while drawing an unknown card, unless you played Jan Kelway. So what you do here is usually you target something boosted, so the boost goes away, or you're returning, say you return a 4 provision card to their hand and you draw like an 8, right? You've gained 4 provisions in your hand for that round. So it has uses there, but really only targeting boosted cards, which in Nilfgaard you can boost their opponent's cards with Buhurt and stuff like that. Overall, I would say Ardal, and a decent number of decks boost their own cards. Overall, I say it's okay. Usually you don't play him in tactic decks, but he definitely has a consideration. Like you can consider playing him. You can consider playing him in the decks, and he's not too bad. Just at the moment, I wouldn't say he's in weak, because his effect is pretty impactful, and I think if you buffed him, I think he'd be actually really strong. But I think he's alright right now where he is, and we can see him sometimes. People do play him sometimes, but usually they opt for other cards instead. But we'll see. Next up, we have Artaud. Artaud is a super powerful card. He's 4 for 13, so he's got Assimilate, and then deploy, spawn a base copy of any non-disloyal card you gave Spying to this game. So the most obvious thing here is you just Torres the opponent's deck. The things get Spying. We'll get to Torres later. You just Torres their deck, pick their best card in their deck, give it Spying, and then when you play Artaud, you can play it. The other option, obviously, is you play Mage Torturers or other things. We looked at the bronze tier list that give out Spying. So you just Spying their best card, and then this guy plays a copy of it, which is quite something, all right. You used to be able to Spying an opponent's Artaud, and then it would make an infinite chain, which is kind of funny, but you can't do that anymore. And there are some cards where if the opponent sees that you put Spying on it and knows you have Artaud, you're just looking at the game kind of hopelessly. If they put this Spying on Fukusha, and you know they can Artaud the Fukusha back into like Artorius Vigo, and it just goes on. Or you could put it on like they're playing really tall, you put it on like a Regis Bloodlust, like, well, now he has 17-point slams. So Artaud is an incredibly powerful card. It's played in pretty much every single tactics deck. Tactics decks are pretty good. So he's going to go up here in excellent. He's a reason you play several different cards in those decks, right? You want to take advantage of the Spying in those decks, mostly just to fuel a big Artaud later in the game. Speaking of Spying, we have Artorius Vigo. So he's right here. He's 2 power, 9 provisions. Assimilate, deploy, create a 1 power copy of something from your deck. So normally what you do is you run 3 bronzes, so you only have 3 choices for him. Those bronzes typically will include a Nausicaa Sergeant, which is the one you want to make off of this, because the 1 power Nausicaa Sergeant still spawns a regular battle preparation. So you play this, you spawn the Nausicaa Sergeant, you play battle preparation. That's 2 Assimilate triggers for Artorius Vigo. He goes to 4. And then you have your, the Nausicaa Sergeant is at 1 plus the new battle preparation that's playing at 7. You get an 11-point play with an Assimilate engine out that triggers all your Assimilates twice. Super impactful in the Assimilate decks. You can also do other stuff with the 1 power copy. You can do this for mill decks to make into Kingslayers. You can do this to make 1 power copies of Master of Puppets to like cheese out your opponent's cards and swap them with, give them a little tiny baby unit. There's a bunch of stuff you can do with this. And overall, it's just incredibly strong in Assimilate decks. And has uses outside of those for things like Maggie Divisions or whatever. I would say Artorius Vigo probably deserves... I don't think he's not as impactful as Artaud, but you can use him in other decks. For that reason, I think I'll give him the excellence here, although we might revisit that one. I think he's incredibly good, just giving you a whole bunch of different options of whatever you want, really. Next up, we have Assire. So Assire here, there she is. So 6 for 7. Deploy melee shuffle card from your opponent's graveyard into their deck, and deploy range shuffle card from your graveyard into your deck. So there's 2 options here. You can clog the opponent by giving them really bad cards back. You could get rid of something in the graveyard they need to be in there. So maybe they're playing a Firesworn Fallen Knights, and it's round 3, and they've got 1 Fallen Knight in there. You shuffle back in their deck. They can't bring it back with their Cyrus. Stuff like that. You can also shuffle a card from your graveyard back into your deck. So there's a couple options here. Usually you see this on Golden Necker, so you can play Golden Necker twice because of how impactful that is. But recently we did a construct deck. You can shuffle back in your big constructs. decks want to shuffle back in battle preparation sometimes, because if it's an Ivo deck, they want to play that thing twice. Overall, Assire, I think she belongs in the niche tier. So she's not, and I want to reiterate here, I think I said this in the last video, niche does not mean weaker than okay. Niche just means that it is very impactful sometimes, but it's a very specific time it's impactful, and you can't usually slot into anything. So niche doesn't mean that it's worse than, like, this doesn't mean she's worse than us. Niche tier is kind of, I just put in the middle because where else would you put it? So I think she's niche. She has some very impactful uses, and she's a really interesting card with a lot of applications. Next up, we have Aux, part of the Witcher trio. So deploy lock. If Ceret's in your hand, lock all copies on the opponent's side. So Nilfgaard in particular has a whole bunch of ways to lock. If this was not in Nilfgaard, it'd be a lot more seen, I think. Gregory of Vol is a 6/6 neutral that locks a unit. That's the same as Aux. The downside here is Nilfgaard has a 5/5 Alba Armored Cavalry that also locks, and the Aristocrat Vampire, the Van Morlem Hunter, which is a 4% card that locks. You really have no reason to run Aux over those if you are not getting the bonus effect, and the bonus effect is not worth it. Because it's very, very conditional that you want to lock all copies of a unit on your opponent's side of the board. And the other parts of the combo just aren't good enough to run them together. So at the moment, he is weak. Honestly, I don't want to put him in bad because I think if you buffed, we probably have to buff all of the trio, but if you buff them, they could have some options here. Next up, we have Bacala. Well, it doesn't let me spell it because I need to put the accent mark on it. It has 2 C's. All right, there we go. So it's a 12 provision artifact. Resilience, spawn Imperial Fleet on left, Imperial Marine on the right. This is the only way you say Imperial Fleet, funnily enough. As that order boosts 2 units by 2 and swap their power. Spawning Marine is very impactful. It's an engine. Usually you play this in a deck where you play Jan, and you know what top card your deck is. So generally you spawn a 2-point a turn engine on the Marine, and then you infuse with the Fleet, which will do 1 point per turn because you have a flanking unit out already. And the fact this is resilience, it carries over. I'm playing this in a Shoop Resilience deck right now for soldiers. It's really fun. Probably the next video on the channel, actually. Actually, might even come out before this. We'll see. But overall, Bacala is excellent. It's a very good card for soldiers. It's a really impactful card that comes out. I think it's like the defining card for the soldier deck. It just gives you 2 of them. It gives you the engines. It's just really solid. It gives you carryover. But speaking of very solid cards, I just saw what's up next. We have battle preparation. Sorry, battle stations. Battle stations. I'm told I'm supposed to yell that because that's exclamation mark. So 12 provisions. Play up to 2 bronzes from your hand and draw the same amount. This is absolutely critical to the Ivo decks. They love this because you go in like any shorter round, you go battle stations, Nausicaa Sergeant. Each one plays a battle preparation. Or you open up double engines and armor them with soldiers. A whole bunch of uses for this. It thins your deck by 2 as well. It's just incredibly powerful. This is going right in the excellent tier. Very strong card. It can go in almost anything in Nilfgaard, really. Next up, we have Beauclair. So this one's also going to be this is like the defining card for the Nilfgaard Knights. 13 provision artifact, resilience. Deploy set an allied unit's power to match the highest power enemy. So if the opponent's going really tall, you get a big boost. Usually what you do is you boost up one enemy unit really tall, and then you set your guy that's like, say, 6 power to 25, and that's impactful. And then you reset with the order the opponent's tallest card. And the fact this has resilience, you can use the boost around 2. If you get last say, you can just save this order. If they're playing a boost finisher, which most finishers are, you can then just reset their finisher, play your own, and it's an insane tempo swing. So Beauclair is the deck-defining card for Knights. Knights are a pretty fun deck. Pretty reasonable deck, too. And this is a very strong card. Speaking of strong cards, we've got Brothans up here. He's another Assimilate Triggerer. He's at 4 power, 11 provisions. Assimilate. He creates and plays a bronze disloyal unit from your starting deck. The fact that you're playing him probably means you're playing Assimilate. The choices for this are Emissary, Duchess Informant, and Mage Infiltrator. And of those, usually you pick Duchess Informant with this deck. You put it in your deck. He plays Duchess Informant. The Duchess Informant makes another copy, triggers Assimilate twice. It's a good card. I don't say it's defining those. I think he's pretty solid, though. You do see him sometimes. I don't think he falls into weak, but he's not as popular as other choices at the moment. But he was buffed previously, and it was kind of insane, and that was reverted pretty quickly. So I think he's in the good tier. All right, we have Bribery. So this one's one of the most hated cards if you're an old player. Not so much anymore, though. So 8 provisions. Tactic, create and play a unit from your opponent's starting deck. You just want to pick the biggest thing you can see off of this. Sometimes you win the game. I've had situations where opponent just goes leader ability. They see like the Harmony scenario. With the double cross, they play it, they bribery, get a second one, and you're just looking at that, you're like, what are you supposed to do? They just got lucky. However, there's other times where this sees like 3 4-version cards and they end up playing some 4-version unit that doesn't synergize with their deck, at least other than like being assimilate. So Bribery is one of those cards that at the moment you don't see very much. You do see it occasionally. Like this is, I think, picked up in popularity a little bit recently in my games. I don't think it's. I think I'm gonna put it in niche. I don't know. Yeah, I think I'm putting it in niche. I kind of want to go between okay and weak on this, but it's really dependent on what your deck is. I think some decks, sure, it triggers assimilate, but I don't know if I don't think it's actually niche though. I want to say at the moment, it's okay. It's definitely on the lower end of okay though. Like this is not your priority choice most of the time, but you can pick it as a tactic to include in your deck. Next up, and also one thing to mention for Bribery is when the meta is very dominated by a mirror match, say like another Nilfgaard deck, the fact that you can make a second copy of your best card really erases this up. But you have to play it with Rune Mage most of the time. Double Cross likes Rune Mage anyway though, so that's not too big of a hindrance. Next up we have Catervine, 7 provision tactic, poison enemies spawn a base copy. This is literally only ever used for Vipper. Could give your opponent a Vipper and then you make more Vippers, and at 7 for a poison and a base copy. The base copy thing, usually spawning a base copy of the opponent's card is not nearly as good as playing it. It doesn't trigger assimilate, it doesn't trigger deploy abilities. The only thing it really works on is really big cards, but that's not that common that people just play super tall units unless it's like an Ogroid player. Overall, this value is just really not here. You kind of have to be spawning a copy of like a 10 power, well, at least a 10 power guy and doing the poison. So if you're not playing a poison based deck, it really doesn't fit. And there's just not enough value on this thing. It's really just a case of this thing is only ever used for Vipper, and Vipper is trash at the moment. So unfortunately, Catervine is going in bad. Even if it went to like 6 provisions, I still don't see it really getting that much play, but maybe. It's just bad. The only reason this isn't falling in meme tier is because of Vipper being a really interesting, fun card. Next up, we have Cahir. So Cahir is 7 for 9, really high base power on this guy. Whole bunch of tags. And melee, whenever your opponent receives a boost during your turn, he boosts himself by the same amount. I think one of the original highlight videos I have on the channel is from someone clicking an Erland while I had a Cahir out, because it used to be whenever they got boosted, not just during your turn. That was hilarious, by the way. It's like plus 199. We stole the boost. But anyway, so he's just a really powerful engine for the aristocrat decks not aristocrats, the soldier decks that want to boost the opponent's cards. He's really good, but you can play the deck without him. But in that deck, he is incredible. He's like one of those must-answer cards, and because of that, I think we will actually just move him up to the excellent tier. I'm kind of debating between these two because I have played without him, but I really think he is pretty much should be in the deck, and he's very impactful when you do have him out there. The opponent has to have an answer to him. Something that they can't really have an answer to, though, is Cantarella. So 1 for 7, Disloyal. Play the top card of your opponent's deck. It's an RNG card. The top card of their deck's good. You feel amazing. You can, kind of like Kingslayer in the bronzes, you can instantly win the game by playing Cantarella if you get their best card. And then since it's Disloyal, you coup it and try again. Against Nilfgaard, it's especially effective because they play Jan most of the time and stack their best cards to the top. So Cantarella is like one of those cards where sometimes you instantly win the game, sometimes you just get some random trash card. And I'm going to say she's probably in niche tier. Most of the time, you're just playing her in specific decks like Mill that want to get rid of the opponent's deck. Although occasionally you can see her otherwise. I think she's mostly just a Mill card at this point. Although sure she triggers assimilate and stuff, but usually there's better things to do than play her. So I think for that reason, she's going in niche. Next up, we have our Purify the Entire Row guy, whose name I forgot. Castellan something? Ceallach Dyffryn. So 6 for 6, Purify all units on this row. Very simple, and very simple explanation that Pellar is just better. Pellar is, you can use it on the opponent's cards. Pellar is, usually you don't need to purify more than one unit, and usually you can do it on the opponent's cards with the Pellar. And the other thing is there's the neutral card for 1 provision more that purifies every unit, which is, if you're trying to purify a whole bunch of stuff, is usually better because you can hit the opponent's ones too. So I think he's bad. No, we'll put him in. Yeah, I think he's bad. Like he's he really isn't great. I think actually if he got like a 1 buff down to like 5 or maybe up to 7, he'd see play actually. So yeah, we'll put him in weak for now. I don't think he's that terrible. He's just outshined by Peller for the stat line, and the all row effect is usually just meaningless. I think Peller would be better. He's going bad. Next up we have Coup. Recently Ish went to 9 provisions instead of 10. So it's a tactic with Echo. It's the Echo card for the faction. Damage enemy unit by 3. Death Blow, spawn a base copy, or Conspiracy, spawn a base copy. Conspiracy is pretty easy to set up. There's bronzes that give spying, or you can do it with Taurus, and when they play the good card, you hit it with Coup. Death Blow, if you can't do that, sometimes you hit it with a tactic and Death Blow the card. Coup is incredibly impactful because you can get cards way above its provision costs by playing it. The fact that it's Echo, you get it twice. Overall, Coup is very strong. It is a very, very good card. I don't think it's going to go... I think I'm going to leave it controversially perhaps in good. It can have issues where the opponent purifies off the spying. You don't have the stuff with Death Blow. The opponent can play around it. It's not good if the opponent doesn't have any spine cards in your hand. But usually that only happens in the second round when you have the Echo effect. So I'm going to say it's very good. I don't really want to put on the same tier as these guys necessarily. No, it probably deserves to be up here. Cou's very good. I was trying to not do it, but then I did. Next up, we have Cynthia. Very simple card, 6 for 7. Spawn the Guardian on top of your opponent's deck. This is the Guardian. It's only played in Claude Colgrim. You give your opponent a brick on top of their deck. They're forced to draw into it. What you do with that deck is you just give as many bricks as possible, and then they never actually draw any real cards from their deck. It's incredibly annoying. The value is not there to play outside of that, though, so it's going to be niche, only going in the Colgrim decks. Next up, we have Damien. Damien's been power crept quite a bit. So he's 6 power for 11. He has Human Knight Soldier, blah, blah, blah. Order, melee, reset your leader. So you kind of have to zeal this or defender it, and it's not really worth zealing or defendering over certain other cards. So for a big example, like say you're playing, let's compare the impact. We're playing a deck with this where you reset the leader. So you reset Enslave 6, right? That's 12 points, stealing an opponent's unit. That's 6 or more. That's like usually the high case. Let's change that to, we're going to use the same thing. So probably say we're using Petri's Filter or a defender to protect this. Let's say we do it in Nilfgaardian Knights with the neutral card Regis, and you steal all the boost off the opponent's unit. It's way more impactful. The setup for Damien isn't worth what he does at the moment. So at the moment, he's pretty bad. Yeah, I think he's pretty bad at the moment. I don't think he's quite in this tier, though. We're going to put him in... I think he's pretty similar to these guys, actually. He's weak at the moment. I think if he was like maybe 10 provisions, you can justify it more reasonably, because you have to account for the provisions to add in the Zeal card and Defender to really run him. But he's not great at the moment. Next up, we have Runestone. So this is going to be kind of funny. Dazhbog Runestone, 5 Persian Alchemy, create and play a Bronze Nilfgaard card. Now, here's the thing. Every Runestone is pretty much going to go in the meme trash tier because playing 5 for a random bronze is really bad. The only thing that's going to keep the Nilfgaard Runestone from being in the meme trash tier is that there's Assimilate, which triggers off of this. It's still a meme, though. Let's be real, though. It's still a meme card. You don't play this. You play Duchess Informant instead. Lets you target things. Like, there's much better things to do. I almost had you guys there. No, it's still meme. All right. Next up, we have Dead Man's Tongue. So 7 provisions. Spell, banish a card from your deck. It was bronze, banish another one. Then you boost a card by the combined provision cost. So it thins your deck by 2. And it gives you the points equal to the provisions of the things you banish. So normally you say you'd provision, normally what you do is you banish 2 4 provision cards you don't want to draw. It gives you +8 boost. If you're in a little bad spot and you didn't draw, let's just say you're going to lose the game if you don't banish your scenario from your deck. You can play for 14. But really, Dead Man's Tongue is just a thinning tool. The problem with Dead Man's Tongue is not that it's a bad card. Dead Man's Tongue, in a vacuum, is a good card. Thinning 2 is a pretty good effect, and it comes with tempo. What makes Dead Man's Tongue unfortunately going to fall really low on this tier list is because it's competing with Nilfgaard. Nilfgaard's consistency is off the charts. You have things like Blightmaker, you have things like the Arda Feainn, you've got things like the big one, Yonkel Wait. There's so many better ways to thin your deck. There's neutral ones like Tempest and Fog/Frost. They play for more value over time, and it still thins your deck by 2. So I think, unfortunately, it's weak at the moment. I think at 6 revisions, this thing might see some consideration, but actually at the moment, I think it's a little bit too weak to be played, unfortunately. Kind of on the same lane here is Doadrick. So Doadrick's an 8 for 8, like pretty solid point slam. Again, I'm going to repeat this. This is a dual faction card, but in the Gwent Online library, it shows up as Syndicate. But this is also Nilfgaard. So if you control an agent, gain Zeal. Nilfgaard has some agents, you can get Zeal. Order range, draw a card, then move one back to the bottom of your deck, cooldown 1. Okay, it's a pretty good tempo, and it helps you get consistency by cycling your deck. Exact same things I just said about this apply to Doadrick, except this isn't as good as Doadrick. Just drawing a card and putting one back, it's not nearly good enough to compete with the other Nilfgaard thinning options. Next up, we have Emhyr. No longer a leader token. That was a long time ago, wasn't it? Emhyr Var Emreis, so 4 for 13, pretty expensive. Play a bronze soldier or aristocrat from your hand, then draw a card. So it thins your deck by 1 and gets out 2 engines at once because he's kind of an engine. When your opponent plays a unit, give it spying. He's how you set up all your spying synergies, ideally. Order sees a 1-power enemy unit with spying. Devotion, you can reset it. So really, the 1-power enemy unit, either you hit something down and you can seize it, which is okay because there's things with order or stuff you might want to take, or you can just play your 1-power spyings disloyals to the opponent's board and take them back. I want to say he's okay. He does see a lot of play in the status Nilfgaard, but not as much as these other guys up here. Like, you see him more. Emhyr has some potential. He's okay. I want to say okay. Like, I can go between okay and good on him. Kind of depends on the day. Today we're going to put him in okay, because I think he's not as good as the other stuff up here, but he certainly has his uses, and he's not a bad choice. Let's move up a little bit. Next up, we have False Ciri. False Ciri is a very interesting one. I said about a lot of cards, because Nilfgaard has a lot of interesting effects. So 1 power 7, Disloyal. Play a bronze tact if you're in the graveyard and give it Doomed. At the end of self, boost self by 1. And Grace 8, move to the opposite row and Purify. So what you do here is you play False Ciri to the opponent's board. Usually you pick Buhurt and play Buhurt on the False Ciri to get her up to 4. So they can't like do a one pinged allied damage to it. And then you boost your guy by 9. And you're essentially getting all those points back because you're going to have the False Ciri move back to you by the end of the round. Usually the best way to do this is you play a Sangreal on it, because Sangreal will give it plus 12. And it'll move back to your board at the end of the round. Or when it'll move up to your board when it gets to 8, which will do because of the Sangreal. And it purifies when it moves, so it takes off the negative effect of Sangreal. So you give a huge amount of points to it. That's the normal combo. You also do double boot her on this, or just play any bronze from your graveyard if it's a long round. False Ciri sees an incredible amount of play. I'm going to put her in excellent. She's incredibly good. If you use False Ciri Sangreal, think about that. You're getting so many points. It's playing, like, it's just so many points, really, because the Buhurt's going to play for 9 when she plays it from her graveyard. The Sangreal is going to play just for the full 12 because it's going back to you. And then all of a sudden, your False Ciri is a 1 point per turn engine that it cost you, let's say it cost you 13 provisions for the False Ciri and Sangreal combo. It cost you 13. You're getting, 12 from the Buhurt, 12 from the Sangreal, and then she's going to give you 1 point a turn. That's way above what you'd expect for a 13 provision combo. It's very, very good. And you see this in a bunch of decks. Like, some decks don't even play like enemy boost. They just play the False Ciri and the Sangreal because it wants tempo in it. Next up, we have Faircart. Faircart gives 3 power, 6 provisions. He plays a special from your hand, then draws a card. So he thins your deck, and then whenever you play a special, it spies a random non-spying enemy. If this was targeted spying, it'd be way better. At the moment, giving out random spying is not what you really want to do. Giving out random spying is like not ideal because Emhyr can do everything, and then you've got the targeted ones like Mage Torturers. So you're kind of just playing him then for the special from your hand, or you're going all in on spying. All in on spying isn't great, but playing a special from your hand thinning is okay. I think he's a little weak, unfortunately. A lot of Nilfgaard's thinning is a little weak just compared to the other cards you have. Next up, we have Fergus. This is their devotion card, one of them. So deploy, give enemy unit spying. Devotion, give 3 units spying. 7 for 6, that gives out 3 spyings. Usually the 3 spyings will trigger at least 1 point on your cards because of either various aristocrats. So really, Fergus is pretty decent. I'm going to give him a similar treat to Emhyr. He's playable in the status Nilfgaard decks, but you don't always see him in them because he's pretty frequently in them, but I wouldn't say he's always in them, but we'll see. I think Emhyr's better than him, but I think they're both all right. The thing with these decks you have to consider, by the way, is when I say these are suboptimal, remember that for golds, when you're building a deck, you probably only get like maybe 3 expensive gold cards in your deck, like 3 13 vision cards or something. So you got to keep that in mind when I say it's usually not the optimal choice, is that there's a lot of cards that times you might have this, but there's not that many high provision slots in decks, as opposed to bronzes where you can have a whole bunch of bronzes. Like for golds, you don't really get that many expensive golds in your decks, so you're really picky with which ones you do get. Next up, we have Ffion, our defender boy here. So 1 for 10 with 2 armor. Defender's just, it blocks stuff. It's really good. It spawns battle preparation, so it does trigger assimilate. It gets up to 7 with 4 armor, which is actually really hard to get through. The thing with Ffion is it's kind of like the other ones. If your deck needs a defender, you put him in. So he's going to go in niche because of that. I don't think I want to put him in okay or any like the real tiers here, because most Nilfgaard decks don't really want Ffion. It's more of the meme decks. The only thing, actually, no, we got to move him up because of Colgrim, right? He's required for Colgrim decks. We'll put him in good. I almost forgot about Colgrim. I was like thinking of which cards need protection, but yeah, Colgrim is the one. So I think we'll put him in good because of Colgrim. He's played in that, and if you're playing any Nilfgaard meme deck, you're going to put him in. You also put him in Cultists. Oh, that's right. Cultists is also a pretty popular deck. Let me reevaluate here. I'm leaving him in good. He's really good in those decks, but he's not the best cards in them. All right, is this Fringilla up next? Sure is. Fringilla Vigo, 4 for 7, damage an enemy unit by 2. That is terrible value. Increase number of targets by 1 for each adjacent major construct. Ceiling is 10 for 7 points. The damage is spread out, which is bad, and the damage is capped at 2, which is not much, so that's bad. And the value isn't there, so it's bad, and she is bad, unfortunately. Next up, we have our Assimilate 2 card. Is this Glynnis? Is it Glynnis? Yes, it is. Glynnis. So 4 for 6 with 2 armor. Actually, pretty reasonable stat line. This is very similar to something like, what's it called? Percival in Scoia'tael, where the assimilates. Not assimilates, with the harmonies. But Assimilate 2, here's the thing for her, though. Assimilate 2 is actually pretty good. Like, Assimilate 2 can get you a lot of points. I'm going to say she's okay. She is a possible thing to play in your Assimilate decks. The problem with her here is that she's competing in the 6 version slot for things like Nausicaa Sergeants or Slave Drivers that also spawn things and trigger assimilates. So usually just having more of those is better than having her. Or you can have a more expensive gold and make this a bronze tactic for Jan to stick on the bottom. Can't wait till we get to him. We're going to have such a rant. But yeah, I think she's okay. I don't think she's bad. I don't think she's like down here, because you buffed her. She's actually really, really strong. But at the moment, I think she's okay. Next up, we have Gorthur. Or is it Gorthur? Who knows? I like Gorthur better, though. It sounds cooler. So Gorthur Guaed? One of those two? It's probably not one of those two. But this is the artifact. It's resilience. It spawns one of the Witchers. So Mentor, Adept, Viper Witcher, Alchemist. So you get one of those. We talked about those on the other tier list. And then it has move a card from your opponent's graveyard to the top of their deck. So it's clogging the top of the opponent's deck with their worst card. It goes in Colgrim Clog decks. It's very important to Colgrim Clog decks. I hate Colgrim Clog decks. I think most people do. That doesn't mean the deck's not reasonably effective, and it doesn't mean that this card is terrible. And the thing is, you can get the Mentor off of this, which is really nice, because you can play this as a finisher card if you need to, and just get the Mentor to point slam for like 10 or so. So that helps it quite a bit, and you can also open with an engine. The fact you open with an engine or play a finisher off this is actually pretty flexible, and it's not too bad. The other thing you can do this that you don't see much anymore, but you used to, is you can use the order to move a good card to the top of the opponent's deck, then play it with Cantarella, but that's not so common anymore. I think we're going to put this one in okay. Yes, it sees playing Colgrim. I have to put it up here then, because it sees playing Colgrim. It's not bad. Like, it's not a bad card. You can play it in non-Colgrim just for value, because it triggers assimilates, and it is giving you an engine or a point slammy finisher. It's not ideal in those decks, but I'm going to leave it in good just because of how key it is to the Colgrim decks. Next up, we have, let's see how we pronounce this, Guillaume de Launfal, something like that. I don't know. I'm not a French speaker. Deploy boost self by number of allied knights on the row, then boost self by an enemy and itself's combined power half. That was a really bad way to say that. What you do is you play him, you pick an enemy unit that's really tall, and he and the enemy unit get half of the both units' power split up. So you pick one enemy unit, and that's really big, and him, you split the points between you, and then you get rid of the enemy unit, and he stays big, is really how this goes. The move status grace effect almost never happens, but if your opponent's playing like King Trum or something, they gotta watch out for it. But overall, he's just a knight card. He's pretty good in knights. Nilfgaardian knights are pretty reasonable, so he's going up here. Yeah, pretty solid in that deck. Next up, we have Hefty Helge. Hefty Helge's a siege machine, I should say. Siege engine. 4 for 8. She's got shield, so Hefty Helge, hilariously enough, is really bad and actually kind of terrible against Nilfgaard, because Tourney Joust is a 4-person card that just removes the shield and does 4 and instantly answers this. So against Nilfgaard, this thing never lives, which is pretty funny. But otherwise, it has deal 2 damage, and when your play tactic gets a charge, so it can keep doing the 2 damage. Stuff like Combat Engineer and things can trigger this a whole bunch of times. You play this, you play Stefan. Stefan plays 4 Ace Up the Sleeves. Those are all tactics. All of a sudden, this is doing 10 damage the next turn. I think it is okay. You can consider it for tactic decks. Usually they don't, but it's kind of like Glynnis, where you can run it in those decks pretty effectively if you want to. Kind of like Ardal type of tier on that one. Now we have a very strong card. So Henry is 7 for 11. And if your opponent has not passed and their hand is not full, create legendary. You guys can read this all out here. But basically what you're going to do is you're going to see a bunch of legendaries. You're going to put one in the opponent's hand from your faction and put the other ones up on their deck. You're going to take one from their faction to your hand and put the rest at the bottom of your deck. This is really strong because you're getting provisions added to your deck. You give the opponent some... Usually you play Rune Mage before this, pretty much always. So you're giving your opponent some trash card that doesn't synergize with their deck, because there's a lot of Nilfgaard cards that do not synergize outside of Nilfgaard, like at all. And then you're going to take something that's pretty good from their faction, put it in your hand, put the rest on the bottom. And then you can play Yonkelway if you want to and stack all the provisions to the top of your deck. And you get to play all golds for the rest of the game. Usually you don't get enough all good cards, so you might not want to do that. But it gives you a whole bunch of cards to choose from. It lets you trigger abductions. It lets you do a whole bunch of stuff. Henry is an excellent card. There's a reason a lot of tactics decks and a lot of Simlight decks are Henry decks or Henry Shoop decks. And that reason is because of Henry, as it says in the name. Next up, we have Imperial Golem. So Imperial Golem has a deploy reveal top unit of your opponent's deck and boost damage self by power and shuffle it back. He's 13 for 6, so that's a really good stat line. Usually takes about 5 damage, which means he's not a good stat line anymore. The only reason you play Golem is if you want to do Hyper Thin with him as your Hyper Thin target. Although, usually you want to play Albric instead of Golem for Hyper Thin, so it's not really relevant anymore. Because Renfree Albric is just better. The other thing is, what you have to account for, if you're playing a construct-based deck, you have Primordial Dow, the Ifrits, and the 2 Ifrits, right? That each get benefit for each Golem, each construct played previously. So you play this, it buffs the boost on Primordial Dow by 1, the damage on Enraged Ifrit by 1, and the damage on Colossal Ifrit potentially by 3. So you're getting 5 extra points for each construct you play, ideally. Which means he's actually playing for reasonable value in a construct deck. So for that reason, I like Nilfgaard Contracts is actually a pretty solid deck. I've played it quite a bit this season. It's a really fun one. I'm going to say that he is... I'm going to say he's okay. Nilfgaard Construct isn't the most popular deck, and you don't need to play him in it, although he does help buff up the other constructs. You don't need him. You can play just like the other constructs and be okay. But I think he's a pretty solid one. I would keep him over something like Living Armor. So he's going to go in okay. Alright, here we go. So Isbel. 5 for 8, order ranged. If your opponent's hand is not full, look at the top card of both your decks. Keep one and give one to the opponent. So, quick rant for you guys. Isbel was bugged for like years, where sometimes they couldn't figure it out. I submitted several complaints over this. Not complaints, what's it called? Bug reports. Isbel was bugged, where previously, if you clicked her ability, only you would keep a card. And if you kept a card and the opponent didn't get one, you just won the game, pretty much. So it was random. It was pretty unlikely to happen. Like, it didn't happen every time you clicked Isbel. But when you clicked Isbel, there's a non-zero chance, like maybe it's like 10% chance, that you are the only one who gets a card and just win the game. So she was really bugged for a long time. After that bug was fixed and people stopped abusing it, because people did abuse it, like they just like played her and got the order off and sometimes won. Is that after that she's completely meme and unplayable. It's range locked. You're both getting a card. It's sure you see the better card. That's an order. It's just not worth it. Next up we have Ivar Evil-Eye. 4 for 10. Deploy, swap this unit's power with an enemy unit. Adrenaline 2, damage it by 4 instead. So you want to play this before the Adrenaline to get the swap. There's not too much to say here. If the opponent has a really tall card, Ivar is insane. Like if they have a 20-point card, you play Ivar, it's a 32-point swing. Well, he's 32-point swing on the swapping, and you're also going to have a 4-point unit. So it's a 36-point play. Ivar is absolutely ridiculous whenever the opponent has something tall. And Nilfgaard Knights gives something tall, and you can play them outside of those decks because you can always do the pretty common thing is the time you might see this is in non-Golden Necker Mill because they want a huge tempo play, you can play him in that. But usually he's just in Nilfgaard Knights, but he's like with Bacala. That's why you play the Knights. And we're on to the rant. Let's try to make this short. Jan Calwait, or Calvait, I think it's Calwait. 7 for 11 at the moment. Jan Calwait sorts the cards in your deck from highest to lowest provision cost. At the start of the game, he moves himself up by 1 for each tactic in your deck. Jan Calwait is the single best consistency card in the entirety of Gwent. It's better than Oneiromancy for consistency because you're getting every gold card in your deck guaranteed. If you draw him and you put enough tactics in your deck, you will draw him. So he is the best consistency card in the entirety of the game. And the other thing is sorting from high to low means all of the bad say your deck has 165 provisions, right? Say throughout the course of the game you draw 100 provisions. Say your opponent draws 115 provisions, and that's the value of the cards you play. Normally you'd expect the opponent to have an advantage there because they're playing more provisions than you are. With Jan Calwait, you are always playing as many provisions from your deck as possible. You're not going to miss any of your cards. That is why it's so strong. That being said, it also just makes every 4-provision tactic playable by just being in your deck to shove to the bottom. Jan Calwait is arguably the strongest card in this entire faction, just for what it does. Any deck in the entirety of Nilfgaard, you can play this except Renfrey. If you're playing a Shoop deck, you run tactics, so you find your Shoop. You're playing a soldier deck, you run a couple tactics, you find your Bacala and battle preparation, battle stations and stuff. Like pretty much everything that's not Golden Necker or Renfrey wants this card, and it's absolutely insane. And every time you make a deck, you must consider at the start of your deck building, is this a Jan Calwait deck or not? It's an incredibly powerful effect. Cannot emphasize how strong this card is. Next up, we have, what's it called? Joachim here, right? So Joachim de Wett, 2 for 10, disloyal, put an enemy, or deploy, play the Tom, well, I can't speak for a second there. Play the top non-disloyal unit from your deck and boost it by 8. So give this to the opponent, you get a top card of your deck plus 8. It's really great if that's an engine because it's going to be super protected, and then you can coup this for extra value. This is really what you want to play coup on. I think it's a pretty good card. You don't see it all the time. Maybe it actually falls down here. No, let me think. The coup and Joachim combo is an oldie, but I don't think it's played that much anymore. But after he got buffed a couple times, you do see him. Let's see. I think we're gonna go with. He's gonna go down here and okay. I think. You don't need him for coup. Coup is a whole bunch of targets otherwise, and you don't play him without coup. Usually what you see him in is something like spy or like status Nilfgaard, where the giving the opponent's thing with spying is pretty helpful. But he could be up here and good. I'm going to leave him here for now. Next up, we have Colgrim. Colgrim, again, the definition of a deck-defining card. 1 for 9. Adrenaline 1, so he goes off twice if you have the same number of cards as your opponent. At the end of your turn, boost self by difference between the number of cards in your decks. So you either stick a whole bunch of cards on top of the opponent's or bottom of the opponent's deck, and then the opponent has a giant deck and your deck is small and it gets like 15 points a turn for 2 turns, which is 30 points. I know that's really great math. Or you thin your deck all the way down to like 0 cards, and then you can use them that way. Usually you do both. Colgrim is incredibly powerful. Colgrim can be played in Golden Necker. Colgrim, you don't usually do that though, because you can copy it with Letho Kingslayer. And the best thing about Colgrim, other than its insane engine potential, is if your opponent has more turns than you, he is better because you get more turns triggering of the adrenaline. Honestly, you can even play the meme deck. It's Enslave 8, so already it's kind of funny. So Enslave 8 for tempo, and then in round 2 you play Jan Calway, you go Defender, Colgrim, you play down to 0 cards in your hand round 1. And you go, no matter what the opponent passes or not, you just play to 0. You go Defender, Colgrim, Kingslayer, Letho Kingslayer, I should say, and then your opponent has 10 cards in their hand, and you are getting like 30 points a turn for 10 turns, and they cannot win unless they can remove the Defender and then your guys. It's very meme, because they do often remove them, but the fact that things like this exist, and you can play Colgrim and stuff like just any Nilfgaard deck that thins a lot, you could put him into. He is a deck-defining card. He's definitely going up here. Next up, we have Leo. Leo Bonhart. 3 for 10. Same stat line as Geralt. Same ability as Geralt on the melee. Destroy an enemy with 9 or more power, but he has the upside of range, destroy an enemy Witcher. Fantastic for hitting Ciri Nova decks and Golden Necker decks, because you can just hit the Ciri Nova, who's at 8 power, usually not vulnerable to this. You can usually hit the Witcher ones. That's kind of the most common scenario for it. Usually doing the destroy with an 8. But I think Leo's pretty good. You see him pretty often in decks like as an alternative or a bonus to Vilgefortz. Specifically Shoop decks, you see him in a decent amount, and I think he's a pretty good card. Next up, we have Letho Kingslayer. Letho Kingslayer is only as good as the card you are copying, which is normally going to be Madoc or Colgrim. Because of that, so he transforms into a base copy of a unit without changing power, or used to be Phoenix. So 4 power for 10. You really have to be copying something really good. So he's going to go in niche. He's only really good in those decks. But in those decks, he is fantastic. So it's like the definition of like a niche card for me. You don't have to play those decks with him. You could play bombs without him, and you can play Colgrim without him. The only like Golden Necker approach. But if you choose to run him, he can have his incredible moments there. Speaking of Letho, we have the other Letho. So 8 for 8, if Ox is in your hand, lock an enemy. 8 for 8 lock is bad. 8 for 8, you want to play a lock card for the lock status, not for its points. So if you're playing an 8 for 8 lock, it's generally worse than a 6 for 6 lock, which is generally worse than a 5 for 5 lock, which is generally worse than a 4, even a 3 for 4 lock, which Nilfgaard has all of those. So Letho really needs to have the second effect. So if Sarah's in your hand, damage it by 3. That is the Nilfgaard stratagem, right? 3 damage or imprisonment. 3 damage and lock. Because you get both effects. Letho is just weak. Where's the other one? It's weak. It's not good enough. Despite the 8 points he's bringing down, it's just not enough. The multi-specific card combos like Etriel Morelga, like Palmerin and Milton, they should have higher value than generic, like any generic 2 cards, because you have to have the specific ones, and he's not at that level. That is really warranted. Next up, we have Lydia. So, pretty simple card, 5 for 8. She is melee, create and play a bronze special card from the opponent's faction. So you're getting like a random one, kind of. And then range is play one from their graveyard. This is very consistent. You always know what you're getting with this one. And the fact that you have the choice is really nice. Playing cards, it triggers your assimilates. She's got pretty reasonable value. You're paying for the assimilate trigger and the bronze special. She's actually just like a pretty good card. You see her very often in assimilate decks, just for making stuff. So she's pretty good. Next up, we have Masquerade Ball. This one's going to be pretty simple here. Masquerade Ball is a scenario that when you play Aristocrats, it triggers and gives you this Fangs the Empire, gives out poison, and it also spawns a Thirsty Dame. Thirsty Dame is amazing, and the fact that you're spawning poisons with this is you double poison if your units that you're playing also give out poison, or it lets you just do a whole bunch of stuff, developing engines while poisoning. It is amazing in Status Nilfgaard. Status Nilfgaard is good, so this is going up here. I'll just stick it somewhere in the middle, like over here. Really good. All right, now we're going to have the same discussion here. Cultists. I'm just going to do Master of Ceremonies. 7 for 7. At the start of the game, infuse 2 random gold non-cultists in your deck with this ability. Blah, 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 blah. No one cares. The only thing you care about is you're putting cultist on a unit so you can trigger the scenario, and then all of your cultists get infused. So you just get engines. Fun fact about this card, Veil applies while not on the board. So Most things only apply while they're on the board. Most abilities. Veil applies all the time. So if you have Veil cards in your deck and Master of Ceremonies hits them, he will not infuse them. So just random tidbit there. But yeah, Master of Ceremonies, it's good because it's in Cultist Nilfgaard, and Cultist Nilfgaard's like a deck. That's the only reason it's up here. Otherwise, this thing's terrible. Next up, we have Menno. Menno got buffed recently to 7. Menno is another one of those thinning cards. It thins a tactic out of your deck. Again, in any faction except Nilfgaard, these cards are really very, very strong. In Nilfgaard, with things like Jan, you just have better ways. You just have better options than Menno. I'm gonna put him in OK. You can play him if you're not playing Jan Calwait, but let's be real. If you're thinning out for tactics, you're probably playing tactics, which you're probably playing him anyway. So honestly, I'm gonna put him in OK. I'm just gonna put him in OK, because Jan just dominates all consistency in Nilfgaard. Next up, we have Milton. So he's got to deploy boost enemy unit by 3, then boost self by 3. So it's a net neutral boost, but he's going up to 8. It's pretty hard to kill. Then he has order, boost self by the last boost you gave to an enemy unit this round. So if you only play Milton, you're giving the opponent 3 points, then you're taking those 3 points back, essentially playing 8 for 7. That's not good. What you almost always do with him, you play Sangreal, you play Palmarian, something gives the opponent a big boost. This is Palmarian here for reference. We'll get to him in a little bit. But Milton's a good card. You can play Milton. These False Siri and Milton and Sangreal combo is, you can't really do it. Let's put it this way. It's better to do False Siri and Sangreal on their own than it is Milton and Sangreal on their own. But you can obviously combine them together. And it's still good. There's a lot of combos in Nilfgaard Knights for this. I'll put him by Guillaume over there. And on to his buddy Palmarian. So Palmarian's a 4 for 7. Choose an unboosted enemy, then play the top card of your deck and boost the enemy by that amount. If you control Milton, you may choose from the top 3. So you're finding you're either taking the top card or getting one of 3 cards, and then you're boosting the enemy by it. Now, boosting the enemy usually isn't too bad because you're going to play resets, you're going to play Tall Punish, you're playing cards to take advantage of the opponent being boosted, and you Milton out there, you can get something really big. I'm going to say he's just at the same level as Milton because you're going to play them together. You're going to play him with Milton, I should say. You can play Milton without him, but he's a Nilfgaardian Knights, and he's pretty good there. Next up, we have our buddy Peter. So Peter, 3 for 6, deploy reset. Peter's hurt by the existence of Spores. Spores is a 4 Persian reset, and usually a reset is enough. You don't need the additional 3 points of tempo coming with it that he provides for being more expensive in your deck. Usually you just rather have Spores. The thing for Nilfgaard, though, is you do often want to play tactics, and that's not a tactic, so he has some considerations. But overall, I think he's a little bit weak at the moment, unfortunately. I think you'd either have to increase the amount of power it comes with him to really justify offsetting over a different Tall Punish. Next up, we have Philippe here. This is going to be a long video, isn't it? Sorry about that. So Philippe, maybe you like that, actually. Let me know. You like long ones or short ones? Maybe we'll do a poll. So Philippe's 5 for 9. If you control a vampire, gain Zeal. You always want to have Zeal. Give an enemy unit doomed. If it has a status, lock it instead. If it has more than one status, poison it. So, Philippe, if you do not kill Philippe, you're going to lose. That's usually what it comes down to. Like, there's a 90% chance if you don't kill Philippe, you instantly lost. Because Philippe just gives so many poisons out that they're just killing so many of their units in status Nilfgaard. It's a must-kill card. If you have something like Vigo's Muzzle in your deck, you kind of have to save it for Philippe. So for that reason, he's going alongside Ball. Like, those are the key cards in the deck. Prophet. Prophet's going right alongside his cultist buddy. So, 8 for 7, deploy, damage self by 2, then lock all the cards in your opponent's hand. Next time they play one that's locked, remove all the statuses from it. So they can't play like a Veil card. They have to play one that actually got locked. And instead he locks himself. The only reason you play this is because of cultist. And that reason is just going alongside this, just because cultists are good. It's not as specific as these, I don't think. Usually you don't see the decks with this as much. Maybe Kingslayer doesn't deserve to be in niche. Maybe these do deserve to be in. You know what? They're going to niche. That makes me happier. They're only seen in cultists, but in cultists they're amazing. Does that mean do we have to change any of these because of that? No, I don't think so. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Next up, we have Rain Farn. This might just be an anti-cultist bias, but that's what you came here for. Well, not really, but we're getting. 4 power, 10 provisions. Disloyal boosts an allied unit by the combined power of units adjacent to self. It's just a really big payoff. You make your opponent's cards really tall with the status, or not status, with the knights, and then he just takes advantage of it by giving you the points back. Usually he's okay. I think I'm going to put him in good though. I think I'm going to put him in good. You can go between good and okay here. You don't always play him in Nilfgaardian Knights, but he is pretty good in there, and he is a huge tempo play when you play him. One card I do know where it's going right away though is Ramon. Ramon has 4 power and 2 armor for 10. It spawns a base copy of a soldier from your hand, gives it 2 armor. So most soldiers have a barricade ability where the extra armor protects them very nicely. Or you're making something Nautical Sergeant, which is point slamming for 13, triggering a Simlade to God's own armor, stuff like that. Ramon is just very flexible. You can make an extra lock if you need it, make an engine, make a point slam. It's just an excellent card. Like Ramon has so much flexibility with it. You can do a lot of stuff with it. A lot of decks will play it. And it's just a really, really strong card. Next up, we have Rico. I know where Rico's going. So Rico here is whenever an opponent plays a unit while it's in your deck, set power equal to its power. The only way you ever use Rico is you discard him for your Rience in Hyper Thin, because you thin down to like 2, so you guarantee you're going to discard him, and then you can kill whatever the last thing your opponent played is with the Rience. So he's going to niche. He's only seen in that. He's really good in it though. But that's really all you can do with him. And speaking of Rience, he's up next. It's convenient. So Rience is 7 for 12. Decent power on him. Deploy look at the top 3 units of your deck, move one to the graveyard, and destroy an enemy unit with power equal to it, exactly equal to it. In order, set the power of a unit to match the number of cards in your deck. So what you do is you play Hyper Thin. You go down to 1 card in your deck. It's Rico. When your opponent plays something, you discard the Rico. Rico will have the same power as it. It destroys it. Then the next turn, you set an opponent's unit's power to 0, and that kills it because you have nothing in your deck. So that's what you do. Really good in Hyper Thin Nilfgaard. With the, just really good in Hyper Thin Nilfgaard. But you don't have to play him. You can play Hyper Thin Nilfgaard without this combo. It's fine that way too. And used to be, we made a deck where you could Ivar Quacks Rience out, and then you click his order to set something like 14. That was pretty fun too. But that's not really viable anymore. But Rience is going to go, where do we put the Hyper Thin stuff? I don't think he's as key as Albrecht, because you don't even always have to play him. I think you would, though. That would have been good. He's good in that deck. And you can sometimes find uses for him outside of that. Roderick. Again, Roderick suffering from Nilfgaard's insanity and consistency. It plays a random gold from your deck. Well, you see 2 and pick 1 to play. You play this for additional consistency. You play this in like a Renfrey deck potentially. You play this in a deck without tactics so you don't have Jan Calwaden. And in those decks, it's pretty good. And it's better than Menno because Menno requires you to play a tactic. Whereas this, you can play whatever, so you don't have to already have tactics in the deck. I'm going to put him in good. It's not quite on the level. Well, it's obviously not on the level of Jan for consistency, but sometimes you just want an extra consistency. It's giving out Disloyal for like statuses. It's pretty reasonable. Next up, we have Rosa. So Rosa and Edna. So they create a bronze unit from opponent's faction, give it to them on their board, and then you have an order to damage a unit by whatever the number of aristocrats in your deck is. And if you kill a target, you spawn a copy and play. So here's the thing. This effect, if the effect goes off, it's insane. 6 power is answerable. But if the effect goes off, you hit something like Joachim, it's insanity. But it is answerable at 6. But you see her all the time, so I think I'm going to give her a good ranking here. She's a good card. Next up, we have Sandor. So, Sandor has deploy, spawn a shuffle card from your deck into the opponent's deck. This is often false series, so you can play it with abduction and trigger it, or something like that. There's a lot of different things you can do with this. And then you have, usually it's false series though, or something you want to get with a abduction later. Then his order spawn a drone at the bottom of the opponent's deck. It says power equal to the difference. So usually you shuffle in the false series, then you abduct either the drone or the false series, or something like that. And then whenever a card leaves or enters your opponent's deck, boosts self by 1. Sandor is pretty niche, I would say. He doesn't go in Clog really, because Colgrim Clog likes to be Golden Necker, or it likes to just use the provisions for other stuff like the Defender and the Letho Kingslayer. And in other Clog decks where you put stuff on the bottom of the opponent's deck, usually you don't play him. You can, but he's just going to niche. Like, he's good in those situations, but usually you don't always even see him in those. Like, he's supposed to be a Clog card, but you don't even always see him in Clog. Pretty niche to me. Next up, we have Serret. another one of the Witcher trios. So 5 for 7, damage any unit by 2. That's so bad. And then it has, if Ox is in your hand, damage unit by 4. All right, in the hand's not as bad as Etriel Morelga, but if the stat line of value is nowhere near as good. So unfortunately, like, all 3 of the Witcher trio are just weak at the moment. So speaking of weak at the moment, where is our boy whose name I temporarily forgot? Shillard. I was thinking of Fritz. This fits. So Shillard is 5 for 9. Set the power of the highest unit in the opponent's hand to 1. It is too niche. It used to be the opponent would always have something big. If you hit a werewolf with this, like, you're just laughing. But you never want to actually pay to put this in your deck. It's something you make off of Henry. It's just bad at the moment, unfortunately. It's not good enough. It's too inconsistent on the value. And if it's not round 3, they can just shuffle it back. What was next? I forgot. I was going to type it in when we forgot. Stefan. Stefan, 5 for 12. He spawns ace out the sleeves for every 3 tactics. Usually you have 12 tactics, and you play him. He does 8 damage. 8 damage is a very, very good threshold. 13 value is not amazing for a 12 version card, but the value is removal. You can spread it out between units, and every ace up the sleeve triggers Assimilate. He is a very, very good card for Assimilate decks, although you don't always see him anymore. You've seen a little bit of I've seen a little bit of trending away from him. I still think he's an excellent card, though. I still think he's really good. Next up, we have Swears. So Swears is a 4 for 7. That's deploy melee, seize an enemy with 3 or less power. 3 or less power is kind of like the threshold where it can be kind of hard to grab stuff with him, but it's not unheard of. Usually you have to like set up a ping or something. The value for him is 10 for 7. That's not too bad, and if you seize an engine, that's really good because you don't lock the target. But usually there's better stuff to do, but he's not too bad. I'm going to put him in OK along with Menno. Okay, now this card, we're not going to have those redeeming statements about. So Catriona, the Catriona. 5 for 10, flanking, the most expensive flanking card in the game, I believe. No, I'm pretty sure it is. Order poison a non-poisoned unit. See that thing where it says non-poisoned unit there? Yeah. So the card has to have a status that's not poisoned, and then you poison it. So it can't put its order on things twice to kill it. And it gains a charge every turn. So flanking, you get 2 charges each turn, which is a lot of poisons to put out. You just have to combo with something that puts out poisons too, right? There's not enough. If you can't use its charges to poison things, if it puts out 2 poisons a turn, you can only play 1 poison per turn from your hand. Or you have Philippe out and he's doing a poison each turn. It's just way too specific. It's way too expensive. It's so easy to answer. The flanking doesn't really help it that much unless you're giving it armor, which might even honestly just be better than using it for the extra status poison. But it's just meme. Yeah, it's not much to say about that. Eternal Eclipse. This is the scenario for the cultists. The only thing that really matters for this one, well, I guess all the effects matter, but I don't want to read the whole thing because I kind of don't like this card. But the important one here is Chapter 1 infuses all your non-disloyal cultists with the thing that makes them into engines, makes them into really big engines, is what it does. So if this chapter goes off, the deck has succeeded, and it will probably do very well. You heatwave this, the deck has lost most of the time. I hate putting this up here, but it's going up here. It is so deck defining and so powerful if it goes off. Next up, we have Tibor. Tibor is a 15 for 12 immunity. Now that stat line looks insane, and it kind of is. 15 point slam with immunity. But at the end of your turn, infuse a random enemy with whenever it receives a status, damage self by 1. It does include its own status. And whenever this card enters the battlefield, your opponent draws a card. So that is awful. And if your opponent has already passed or their hand's full, it damages itself by 12. So you're playing a 3 for 12 with this. Tibor is completely meme. The only playable time for Tibor. You used to be able to play him in Hyperthin, not anymore. The only thing you can do with him is make a bajillion copies of him with Practitioner, and then just kind of hope that the opponent just doesn't have Veil cards. And if you do this, they're going to draw like their entire deck, and then all of a sudden, every turn they take like 9 of these things going off, and there's 5 of these going off, and it's just, yeah. It's meme, though. It's a meme strategy. What is not meme is Torres. It's the opposite of meme. So he gives Spine to units in the opponent's deck. Super good. Just point slam round 1. He usually point slams for like 14 to 20 points. If you want to do that, and it sets up the Spine for all of your other stuff, or you can play him later and replay stuff like Rune Mage or whatever you took out of the opponent's deck. Very, very impactful. top tier, excellent card for all these assimilate decks and just point slams so much. Next up, we have Tourney Shaelmar. Tourney Shaelmar is 4 for 6. It's got damage an enemy Nilfgaard unit by 7. So in a mirror match, 7 damage is crazy. Like 7 damage on a 6th version card is crazy. You're looking at the Etriel Morelga duo effect for something like this. And that's playing for 11 value. That's really great. That's like good value too. Deploy range, boost self by 2 for each non-neutral, blah, blah, blah. It like takes advantage of your assimilates, right? You get points for each assimilate thing you have out there, or non-thing that didn't start. Problem is this 7 damage conditional being an enemy Nilfgaard unit. This is, I don't even want to say niche. This thing's bad. Weak or bad? I'm going to go with bad. The opponent being Nilfgaard used to be pretty common. It's still pretty common, but it's in other matchups, it's just bad. And why would I play this in my assimilate deck for having the units out when I could play Glynnis, who gets assimilate off of specials, and it's also 2 points per card. Next up, we have I think pretty much everyone's least favorite card, Trahaearn. So 2 for 8. Look at the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck, and move 1 to the graveyard. So look at the top 3 of the card, and kind of like Contarella, kind of like Kingslayer, you have a chance to instantly win the game by discarding the key card of their deck. Except this time you have 3 times as high a chance because he looks at the top 3. He's pretty much only played, that's not true. He's not only played in mill. People just, if you have 8 provisions left, people will just slot him into random decks for a chance to win. I'm going to say he's niche. Yeah, he's niche. He's very key to mill. And just sometimes he's insane. Next up, we have Treason. I would not run him, by the way. It's very inconsistent. And randomness doesn't help you in the long run. So we have Treason, 7 prison tactic, gives spying to an enemy and damage adjacent units by its power. This is a pretty simple one here. This one is okay. Like, it's an okay tactic. Is bribery on this tier? Yeah, it's kind of like bribery. It's not bad. Sometimes the opponent plays into it. If they're playing monsters and Ogroids have giant things that you can get really good value, you can usually kill something with this if it's a problematic engine, but there's usually cards you would consider ahead of him, but it's still not too bad. Next up, we have the Urshin of Erlenwald. So 4 for 7 with an armor. That's okay. It's vulnerable to 5 damage removal, is problematic. And he has Veil. Zeal Order, transform into Dooney. At the end of your turn, boost a random allied unit by 1. Here's the thing. 1 point per turn on a 7 version engine is not it. The other thing, though, now usually these cards don't get played unless they have some kind of transform effect. Even like a Parian Phantom with a 3 damage one, which is probably one of the better ones, isn't always played, I should say. And then the immunity version, he transforms into Dooney, and when he enters the battlefield, boosts self by 1 for each spying enemy. There's better ways to take advantage of spying. His transform is like he's weak. Yeah, he's just weak. It's expensive to put him in for what he does. Next up, we're going to go in here with a very recently buffed card, and a great buff, I must say so. So, Usurper Officer. Usurper in general, it's one of the transforming cards. Basically, you play him in 3rd form only. And what you do is you give 2 operatives to the opponent, and then you seize them back with him. And then since you're giving opponents unit spying, whenever they get a spying, he gets a point. So he's going to come down, you can give them to the opponent, he's going to take them back, that's 2 spying, so he's going to get 7. 13-point slam with an engine. That is pretty solid, actually. He's really good at the moment. People are definitely playing him. Definitely a good card. And Nilfgaard kind of doesn't have that many big point slam cards in the golds outside of round 1. Like Taurus is a big one. I mean, you can do setup for them like this, but none of them like on their own tend to be that big of point slam. And he's pretty good for as well as setting up engines. It's kind of nice. Next up, we have the Cupbearer. Cupbearer he's assimilate, deploy poison, ranged purify. It's your in-faction purify, but the thing with him is that assimilate isn't okay, let's put it this way. The decks where you care about the poisons don't really care about the assimilate. The decks where the assimilate don't really care about the poisons. So really, you're playing him for the purify. And if you want him in a purify, you just play Peller. It's just, at the moment, he's a little weak. He's kind of expensive for what he does. Most of the in-faction purify cards are 6 provisions, and he's a 7. Next up, we have Vanamar. Vanamar is kind of cool. So it's 3 for 6, and he destroys a locked enemy. You just combo him with Imposter. You click the Imposter ability on something, It gets locked, you play Vanemar, and it dies. So very common in Renfrey decks. Just overall a good card. Nilfgaard has a lot of ways to lock stuff. I'd say he's pretty good. Like, you perceive him in every Imposter deck. Imposter is fairly common. Next up, we have Vadier. So Vadier de Redu. I can't pronounce French, guys. I am sorry. I took Spanish for like 10 years, not French. So we have 3 power, 11 provisions. Actually, I think it was more than 10 years, but whatever. So Vadier de Redu. He's got Order, Lock, and Enemy. Conspiracy sees it. This is atrocious. 3 on an Order card. He is guaranteed, like, if you play this with no protection, I will bet you a whole bunch of money that he'll die 9 times out of 10. Like, it's not going to happen. You have to protect him. And seizing a locked card, Vanemar just kills it. You just imposter it, kill it with Vanemar. That's 6 provisions. This is just terrible. It's a meme. It is definitely a meme. I don't know if we're going to put this guy in a meme, though. I really want to. So Vilgefortz Renegade, 8 for 13. He swaps a card from your hand to the opponent's graveyard. Sure, theoretically, you can just play him in a deck and take a good card from their graveyard and give them a 4-pushing card or something. What you do with him is you stick your 12, 13 provision, you put your Tibor in their graveyard, you put your Cultist scenario in their graveyard, you put your Yennefer Illusionist scenario in their graveyard. By the way, that's the most cool one if you're going to do one of these meme decks. And then your Imperial Practitioner spawns 5 copies of it on top of your deck because you have them on the board. It's key for these meme strategies. I'm going to put him in niche because of that. But he's very niche usage. He's pretty good in those niches. Regular Vilgefortz, though, 5 for 9. Golden Necker range, that's nice. Melee destroys an enemy unit, summons the top bronze. The opponent summons the top bronze of their deck. It just kills something and brings something else out. You're probably going to summon like a 4 or 5 power thing. It doesn't trigger deploys. It could summon an engine. It could summon like a Nilfgaardian Knight, something with big point slam. But usually you're hitting something really tall with this or something very impactful. The ranged effect is sometimes you can summon kill a token on your board and Hyperthin summon out your big Hyperthin boosted thing. But pretty much you're always doing it for the melee effect. But Vilgefortz is an incredibly powerful card, and pretty much every deck runs him. He's one of the reasons Renfrey Nilfgaard is so strong. It's because you have very consistent removal in the gold cards like him and Leo. If he didn't exist, Leo would be up here, I'm pretty sure. Speaking of removal, the next one up is going to be our boy Vincent. The good Vincent, not the Northern Realms Vincent. So 3 for 10, destroy unit with a status. It's pretty solid. You can kill things with status. Usually you have other removal tools. Like if we look here, we have like the Vilgefortz and the Leo. But in like status Nilfgaard, you play this over those because you can easily get things status with spying, and it doesn't summon out of the deck like he does. I think he goes alongside Leo. He's a pretty good card, and you play him. Next up, we have Reamed. Fallen off a lot since his glory days. He used to be like the big Nilfgaard card. So 4 for 6, boost an allied soldier in all copies by 2. It's kind of hard to have enough copies for this to work. Like the classic example here is you play the Derelium Infantry and it summons out 4 copies of itself, and this plays for 12 on it. That's actually pretty reasonable. But the thing is, they might kill one, and 12 for 6 is good, but that's a lot of effort to do it. You got to play the infantries, get them out. Outside of that, like the only really hope you have is you can play a bunch of copies of stuff, and Slave Infantry exists. It used to be Slave Infantry with this was the thing. But unfortunately at the moment, I'm going to say he's a little weak. Just because that setup, there's better things you can do with the soldiers than that. Speaking of the better things with the soldiers, what's this thing called? I forgot this. It's Vrygriff, I think, but I don't know how to spell it. Yeah, it's Vrygriff. So 7 for 6, a pretty decent stat line. An order, trigger the end of turn abilities of 2 bronze soldiers. Best case scenario, you play this between 2 flanking units on the melee row, and flanking units generally just give you 1 point, and then an extra point if it's flanking. So it's generally going to play for 11 for 6 if it triggers 2 soldiers next to it. Problem with that is you have to have exactly 2 flanking soldiers in the melee row. If you have 1 and then a unit in between, he can only hit 1 of them. It's just, then you're getting like 1 less point because you still trigger it, but it's not getting flanking. He's just weak, unfortunately. He's not nearly as good as Vreemed though, because his ceiling's pretty low. I think he's here. Yeah, maybe if he was 8 power, and then the ceiling would be higher. It'd be okay. The ultimate meme card. I have tried so hard to make this work. 7 for 8, the Vipper. It's got the armor. At the end of the round, move self to your opponent's graveyard. So what you do is you just put this in the opponent's graveyard with Vilgefortz Renegade. And at the end of your turn, while in the graveyard, banish the lowest cost card. If it's the only card in the graveyard, it summons itself to the enemy row, which would then be you. So what you do is you give this to the opponent's graveyard, and then it goes back to your board. So what you do is you make a whole bunch of these through Catervines, through whatever, coups. You just make as many of these as possible, and then it just, at the round 2 and 3, they all come out of the graveyard to your board. Whichever round you have it happen in. However, this is really bad at the moment. It's so expensive, and even if you pull it off, the points from it just aren't good enough anymore. It's completely meme. Next up, we have War Council. So, tactic, 12 provisions, look at the top 3 cards of your deck and play one, and order spawn battle preparation. So it's a tactic, you can play it in soldiers, you can play it with Jan. Soldiers is pretty common with this. One, because you like the battle preparations for the armor. And it has resilience on a order spawn battle preparation. It's a really good card. I wouldn't say it's excellent, but it's very, very good. You definitely play it in stuff like Shoop Soldiers, which is what we're playing at the moment. You can play it in a bunch of different Nilfgaard decks. If you don't want to play enough tactics for like Jan, for example, you just play this at the upper end, and then you can play like have a bunch of resilience cards. Next up, we have Waret the All-Seeing. This guy is a little unfortunately weak. 7 for 8. He moves the highest card in the opponent's deck to the top of it. And range moves the lowest cost card. So what you'd used to do is move the highest cost card, then play Contarella and hit it. The opponent kind of knows you're doing that. And if you move the lowest cost on top, you're kind of bricking them a little bit. But yeah, it's just not good at the moment. Is he bad or is he weak? No, he's bad. Yeah, he's bad. Next up, we have a very niche card here. Czar Theseus. Reveal a random card in your deck. If it's a unit, boost self by its power and shuffle back. If it's special or artifact, play it. You never play this unless you're playing Hyper Thin, so you know what you're getting, and you're getting a big boost. That's the only thing you do is you play this in Hyper Thin. However, you don't even always play this in Hyper Thin because usually you have enough value from like Reents and stuff that you don't have to also do this. So I'm going to say this card's niche. Yeah, I like that. We have 2 cards left, one of them being very fun. Yennefer's Invocation. So, move an enemy unit to the top of your deck. More removal. It's a special, so you can't play in Renfree decks, and it's not a tactic, so you kind of feel bad with the tactic decks. However, Yennefer's Invocation is a very good card. Like, you can take the opponent's card, it removes it, doesn't go to their graveyard, and you get it if it's a good card that you want to play later. So, overall, very good card. Not played as much as it could be, just because there's other things like Heat Wave or things like that, but I think it's good. I think it is good. I'm debating between okay. Usually you don't see this anymore. You know what, since it's the end of the video, we gotta get something for the thumbnail to get people to click on. We're gonna put this in okay. There's just too many options at the moment that are preferred over Invocation, in my opinion. But I think it's still a good card. It's just outshined and outselected by things like Vilgefortz and Heatwave and Erendite and Leo and Vincent at the moment. Still good though. And the last card here. What is your name? I don't know. Vivian Oriole. This is regular Vivian though. Oriole's the neutral one. So 4 for 8. Set a unit's power equal to its provision cost. Now this is a lot of flexibility. You can set a boosted enemy down to its provision cost. Like say they have a really tall Fallen Knight. They have like 20 points. You can set it down to a 6. You can pick your big card and set it up to like 10 or something. The issue is that it's a little bit situational. Because usually your big card just tends to have higher power. And if you're setting a 13 provision card, let's say, what's an example? Let's be, I don't know. Let's say we take your Brothans. This would be pretty good one. Say you take Brothans, you play it, and you play Duchess Informant, blah, blah, blah. It's at 6. You could set it to 11. That'd be plus 5 from Vivian Oriole. That's not good enough. You need more value from her. For an 8 provision card, you'd probably want to boost or reset by at least 10, and that's kind of hard. Like that's too situational most of the time. So unfortunately, she's going to fall in here. And that should do it for all of the Nilfgaard cards. Yeah, unfortunately, this doesn't really fit on our screen, but that's okay. So this was a really long one because Nilfgaard has a lot of unique effects we had to talk about. But overall, this is the tier list. I may have messed a couple things up. You guys let me know if I did. Invocation's the one I'm least certain about, but you guys let me know. Hopefully this was interesting. Hopefully it was fun and informative. I had a lot of fun making it, although my voice is getting kind of tired because this is a very long video. But it was fun. Hopefully this was useful to you guys, and we'll see you next time with the next one in the series. That'll be it for this one, guys. Hope you enjoyed. We'll see you next time. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. And you can check out some more videos over here. And thanks for watching.